Good morning and welcome to a Thursday edition of Wake Up in the Word. We're in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. Come and join me today, and we're going to talk about telling the truth. Do you need to swear to tell the truth? Take an oath to tell the truth? What is this all about? Jesus is going to address it in the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll talk about the historical background of that. But my goodness, we've got a whole world stage on which some of this is being played out today. We started the week out with the senile President of the United States late in the wee hours of the morning, ranting and raving, telling multiple debunked lies as a part of a convention speech. My goodness, I mean, we start out with falsehoods left and right. We're seeing a debacle happening in Chicago unlike any political convention in American history. We're watching a war take place in the Middle East right now against Israel, in which the last couple of days we're too consumed with blinders on, not able to see what's happening in the world right now. But we've seen more of the attack against Israel on center stage over there. First rocket attacks, now drone attacks. And of course, Hamas, 10 months into the ridiculous hostage situation, won't agree to anything that sensible people will recommend, like free the hostages and stop attacking Israel. No, all this is continuing. And even in negotiations, it seems like left and right, people are willing to hide their true intentions, lie about what's really in their heart and in their plans, and you're supposed to just accept it. Well, Jesus really gets into this in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 33, as he talks about how important it is to be truthful and not have to add anything to it, that your reputation should just say you can be trusted. What am I talking about? Verse 33 of Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors, you must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord. But I tell you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, because it's God's throne, or by the earth, because it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, because you can't make a single hair white or black." I guess, that's before Miss Clairol came along, but you know what Jesus is trying to say. Verse 37, "But let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more than this is from the evil one." Well, obviously, it looks like the evil one's in control of a lot of our conversation these days. Now, some might be asking, I know Matthew Poole in his commentary was asking, is Jesus saying throw away all the instructions about taking an oath in court and all that kind of stuff? No, that's not what he's even talking about. And to know the context of what's behind the statement of Jesus right here, you have to understand what was going on with the religious leaders of the day. Because remember, this entire part of the Sermon on the Mount is him saying, you've heard this said, but, in other words, he's trying to help correct some of the misconceptions that have been laid at the feet of the people by the scribes and the Pharisees. Now, Barclay talks about this in detail by saying that there's a couple of things that Jesus is addressing here that were going on in his day that also apply to us. He said the first was what might be called frivolous swearing, taking an oath where no oath was necessary or even proper. It had become far too common of a custom to introduce a statement by saying, by thy life or by my head, or may I never see the comfort of Israel if, and, this is something that was going on in the day, and Jesus says it's totally unnecessary. You shouldn't do this. Barclay goes on to say that far too often people use even the most sacred language in the most meaningless way and take the sacred names upon their lips in the most thoughtless and irreverent way. The sacred name should be kept for sacred things. But it's the second I think we want to focus on, and I think that he did as well. He said the second Jewish custom was in some ways much worse than the first. It might be called evasive swearing. Now, when I began to read about this, I thought, oh, this is what we see right now. It's what's going on in the political theater all over the United States. Evasive swearing. I swear I'm going to solve this problem for you when you know that person's lying through their teeth. I love seeing someone get up on stage and talk about, in the case of our own vice president right now, what she's going to do when she becomes president. Well, what have you been doing with the administration you're part of in the last 4 years? I would say that's probably more accurate about what you're going to do than what were you claiming 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years ago. No, don't play those tapes. That might not go along with what I'm swearing I'm going to do right now. Evasive swearing. And she's not the only one that uses this. It's just a part of political theater these days. Make promises you cannot keep so that you can convince people to vote for you. Well, listen to what it says about evasive swearing. The Jews divided oaths into two classes, those which are absolutely binding and those which were not. Any oath which contained the name of God was absolutely binding. Any oath which succeeded in evading the name of God was held not to be binding. The result was that if a man swore by the name of God in any form, he would rigidly keep that oath. But if he swore by heaven or earth or by Jerusalem, by his head, he felt quite free to break that oath. The result was that evasion had been brought to a fine art. Wow, we must have been learning from those people to just create the kind of ridiculous worldwide society we're watching on stage today. Well, the idea behind this was, hey, if God's name was used, God became a partner in the transaction, where if God's name was not used, God had nothing to do with the transaction. The principle which Jesus lays down is quite clear. In effect, Jesus is saying that so far from having to make God a partner in any transaction, no man can keep God out of any transaction. Jerusalem is the city of God. A man's head doesn't belong to him. He can't even make one hair of his head white or black. His life is in God's hand. Actually, there's nothing in the world which doesn't belong to God, and therefore, whether God is actually named in so many words or not does not matter. God is already there. It's kind of like that song that they sing these days where it says, then there was Jesus. I mean, you look around and you thought God wasn't even paying attention. Turns out he's in everything that's going on. He is paying attention. Barclay goes on to say, here's a great eternal truth. Life cannot be divided into compartments, in some of which God is involved and in others of which he is not involved. There cannot be one kind of language in the church and another kind of language in the shipyard or the factory or the office. There cannot be one kind of standard of conduct in the church and another kind of standard in the business world. The fact is that God does not need to be invited into certain departments of life and kept out of others. He is everywhere, all through life and every activity of life. He hears not only the words which are spoken in his name, he hears all words. And there cannot be any such thing as a form of words which evokes bringing God into a transaction. We will regard all promises as sacred if we remember that all promises are made in the presence of God. What's Jesus trying to say? You got to let your yes be yes and your no be no. To kind of put a cap on this, let's read this in yet another translation, the easy to read version, where Jesus is saying, hey, when you make a vow, you must not break your promise. Keep the vows that you make to the Lord. And then in verse 34, but I tell you, when you make a promise, don't try to make it stronger with a vow. Don't make a vow using the name of heaven because heaven's God's throne. Don't make a vow using the name of the earth because the earth belongs to him. Don't make a vow using the name of Jerusalem because it also belongs to him, the great king. And don't even say that your own head is proof you'll keep your promise. You cannot make one hair on your head white or black. Say only yes if you mean yes, and say only no if you mean no. And if you say more than that, it's from the evil one. You know, the old saying says the devil's in the details. Sounds to me like the devil's in an awful lot of our conversation these days, even among believers. Well, let's take some advice from Jesus today and get the devil out. You have a good rest of your day, and we'll do this again tomorrow when we wind up another week and wake up in God's Word.